of you to be here. It's kind of cold, so some of our members are not able to get out. So some of them are older, so I didn't want to have them come out tonight because it's really cold for a lot of them. But Brother Dan and Brother Bob is here with us tonight. I'm gonna let Dr. Fight introduce himself.
Thank you, Reverend Neely. Really appreciate the work that he's done on the project. So I'm Dr. Andrew Fight. I'm a professor of history at Shawnee State. I'm also the director of research and outreach for this big grant that we're working on from the Appalachian Regional Commission. And I do have, if we can start the slides. Is that? Are we starting the slides there? Is there?
Yeah, we'll start.
Okay. All right. So. Yeah, don't fall asleep. I'll try to keep you awake. I'll do my best.
Let's take a look. There we go.
All right. So our project is called the Appalachian Freedom Initiative. That's the much shorter name for it. But tonight what we're going to do is an update for the community about our research, particularly on the Underground Railroad here in Portsmouth and Scioto County. So if you go to the next slide, give me a chance. Okay, so the full name of the project is the Appalachian Freedom Heritage Tourism Initiative for the Tri-State region. And it's a power grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission. This is meant to help our region adjust to the loss of jobs, manufacturing jobs, coal-related jobs in particular. And so it's an investment in our tourism industry, ultimately. Our partners in this are the National Park Service, the Lawrence Economic Development Corporation, Shawnee State, and Marshall University. So we can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we're working in 9 counties. These are all the counties here. So from Gallia County upriver all the way down to Brown, and then over into Kentucky and West Virginia. So we're talking about Greenup and Boyd, the area around Ashland, and then Wayne County in West Virginia and Cabell, so Huntington area. We have hired outreach specialists for each of these counties. These are local specialists that already sort of know the Underground Railroad or have a strong interest in the Underground Railroad. And they've been working with us on our research and writing our applications or nominations to the National Park Service. So, next slide. So the project is to identify ultimately 27 sites and then nominate those sites to the Park Service, but then build a driving tour based upon those historical sites. So we'll be installing, they're called wayside markers, but it's basically a panel about a 45-degree angle like this, mounted into the ground at each of the 27 sites. And there'll be what's called a QR code. You may know what that is. But basically, you take your phone, take a picture of it, and it takes you to a website. At the website, it's like a virtual historical marker. So there'll be a lot more information, historical photographs, a short documentary film for all of the sites, interviews with specialists who've done the research, stuff like that. So the website is AppalachianFreedom.com, and it is launched, but we've not yet loaded in the content for the tour. So it's still very much under development. So next slide. Now, we have settled on our 27 sites. So I'm not going to run through every one of them, but the ones that are highlighted here are the ones that are in Scioto County. So you can see Pleasant Green Baptist Church where we are, and we'll hear more about that from Reverend Neely here. But also Allen Chapel, the AME, or the African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Portsmouth, is also on our list of sites. And that one has been officially accepted. So, Reverend Neely authored that application. So we got Allen Chapel listed, and Pleasant Green is now pending, right? So I think March 3rd is going to be the national review that the National Park Service will carry out. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that all goes well for us. And Pleasant Green will be verified for its connections to the Underground Railroad. We're also working on First Presbyterian Church in Portsmouth and James Ashley's residence. And again, we'll talk about these today, so I'll save that for later. Over in Greenup, we have gotten this one listed too. So Isaac Downing's escape site at Globe Furnace. If you know where the Bennett Mill covered bridge is over there in Greenup County, that bridge, the abutments were built from the stones from Globe Furnace. So it was a big charcoal iron furnace that used to be located there. And it was at that iron furnace that Isaac Downey was enslaved, and that's where he escaped from. And so we're telling Isaac Downey's story of his escape from Globe Furnace. You can see again all the different sites, but there's a real great variety from escape sites where enslaved peoples escaped from, to stations on the Underground Railroad, safe houses, churches, because of the role that these congregations played. We're looking at also marking some African American settlements, rural settlements like Red Hill Settlement, which is outside Proctorville, over in Lawrence County. Now, some of these you might recognize; they're already quite famous. John Parker's house in Ripley, African American conductor. He's even described as an extractor. So he used to go into Kentucky and extract people. Okay. All right. Is this better? Okay. All right. So really, it's a great variety of locations, and in our research, we've actually found a lot more locations, and so we're hopeful that we'll get another round of funding from the Appalachian Regional Commission. We're actually in the midst of writing that grant application right now, and they are encouraging us to continue our project. So we're hopeful. Next one. So this is a map that shows you the locations that the 27 sites are going to be. And really, if you were to do the whole tour, it would probably take you 3 days. And so what our plan is to actually create like really 3 different sort of tours that are like sub-regional tours. And so the one for Portsmouth will be like Portsmouth and Greenup County, for example. But basically, you've got some concentrations here, from Ripley over into Adams County, and then of course Portsmouth, and then down through Greenup, a couple different sites here, Ironton, Ashland, Soweto, Huntington. Actually, the Huntington one is probably not going to be this. Is it? Well, it's in Guyandot, technically. So, where Guyandot is, it's right next to Huntington. And then if you keep going up the river, you'll get to what's called Green Bottom Plantation, which is right here. One of the largest plantations in West Virginia. And then up to Gallipolis, and that's at Bidwell, but really the town is called Porter. It's right next to Bidwell, but there was a station there as well. Okay, next slide. But we're going to be looking here at Portsmouth. So the 4 sites in Portsmouth, here they're located. This is Court Street and 2nd, and that's where Patty's and Pints is located today. That is where James Ashley's residence was located. And then you have First Presbyterian Church, and then Allen Chapel, and Pleasant Green. Okay, next slide. All right, so really our biggest partner in this project is the National Park Service. They have what's called the National Underground Railroad Network of Freedom. And you may be familiar with the National Register of Historic Places. It's similar, it's like a similar list, but with the National Register of Historic Places, you have to have the original structure. Okay. Now with the Underground Railroad listings, you don't have to have the original structure. So much of the history of the Underground Railroad, right, has been destroyed. And so it's really critical that you not have to have the original structure in order to commemorate these sites. All right, next slide. Now, we're using the definition that the Park Service uses for the Underground Railroad. This is what the law that created the Network to Freedom. So there's an actual separate federal law that created this program, and it defines what the Underground Railroad is, and it confines like what we can mark and not mark. So the way the Park Service defines the Underground Railroad is resistance to enslavement through escape and flight, which includes freedom seekers and those who assisted them in their efforts to escape from enslavement. So keep that in mind. Resistance to enslavement through escape and flight. Okay, next. All right, so just a real quick backgrounder here on the Underground Railroad, right? So, you see it abbreviated as the UGRR. This is, common practice of railroad companies, So you think of, like playing Monopoly, right? And the railroads in there. But anyways, there's a lot of railroad terminology, obviously, that gets applied to the Underground Railroad. And this is a reflection of the time period, right? So railroads really began to take off in the 1830s and 40s. By the 1850s, the terminology of the actual railroad was being applied to these networks of escape that predate the railroad, the actual railroad technology. But over time, those routes, right, those become known as the Underground Railroad. There's some debate over where it originated, but basically, think of all the terminology that is associated with railroads gets applied to the activities that we call Underground Railroads. So stops, stations, cargo, passengers, agents, conductors. Those terms all come from the industry. So by 1853, it was already common to refer to this as the Underground Railroad. Now, the most important thing I would say that to keep in mind is that assisting runaway slaves violated state and federal laws. And so what we're talking about is illegal activity. These folks were breaking the law, both state law, federal law. And I'm not just talking about the freedom seekers, right? But those people helping them. And with slave hunters frequently on their trail, Underground Railroad agents were really always subject to legal jeopardy or worse. And so there's reason that this work was done in secret, underground, because it was illegal. Okay, and that's one reason why it's hard to document this stuff. So we were working on one side in Adams County, and it ended up that we had just one source. We had one source that documented this guy's activity. And I was talking with the Park Service regional manager about it. And he said, yeah, sometimes, I hate to say it, sometimes I wish they got caught. Because then we could memorialize them and their courage and everything that they did. And see, that's it. Like the people that didn't get caught, we have no record of them. If they didn't, nobody else wrote it down. So there are a lot of people that helped. I would say that we have no record. I can't verify. Okay, next. So this is a familiar map if you look at any history textbooks of the Underground Railroad. And one of the things that we're trying to do is fix this map. This map has a big problem. Anybody see it? Look at the border between Virginia and Ohio. And this map makes leaves the impression that there's not underground railroad routes in here. Well, one of the things that we do know is that it was really difficult for people way down in the deep south to really escape. So a lot of the freedom seekers actually are coming from from Virginia, Kentucky. And we've been able to actually trace back a number of these folks, and they're coming from Virginia and Kentucky. And they're crossing numerous different sites all along the Ohio River in our region. Okay, next. you know, it's not like we're necessarily finding everything we're finding is not new. This is what I'm saying. So you can go back to 1898 and Professor Siebert's map from Ohio State, and he has routes here, and he documented the routes here in Southern Ohio. So we're basically, you know, following the footsteps of Siebert and his work back in the 1890s. Yes. There's another one of Siebert's maps, and you can get a sense of. And you know, one thing about maps is that they can mislead you. You know, into thinking that, well, they must be exactly the route they went. You know, but these are. I'll just put it this way: there are many routes, but there are what are called the main routes. You know, and oftentimes freedom seekers were not being conducted; they were on their own. You know, so they were just going from. You know, there's not a lot of rhyme or reason necessarily which direction they went until they got some help.
These little circles, what are they?
So these little circles would be stations. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, those are stations. Okay, next. And just to reflect back to where our map. So we're really putting Southern Ohio, Eastern Kentucky, and West Virginia on the map, to say. All right, so next slide. And I think here I'd like to hand it over to Reverend Millie. But one of the things that's really become clear in our work is that free Black communities and Black churches in particular were really key to the development of the Underground Railroad and its operation. So that's it.
Okay. What you're going to discover is with the Underground Railroad, especially within the free Black communities, they developed networks. There was particularly two networks. One was the AME Church Network under Richard Allen, which was the founder of the AME Church. Ultimately, he was a freedom seeker. He fought his freedom. And what underlies their theology of the AME Church is freedom, liberation. And so all throughout the Ohio River, you had these AME churches popping up, and they ultimately become places where they were Underground Railroad conductors, hideouts, and all that. And also you have within the Baptist tradition, you also have a Baptist network. What you're going to discover later on that Dr. Fike's going to talk about is the Providence Anti-Slavery Missionary Baptist Association. And they break away from the Tees Valley Baptist Association, ultimately over the issue of slavery. That's what becomes Southern Baptist Church and the Northern Baptist Church, which becomes the American Baptist later on in history. And so you have these networks of all these churches, and all of them become hubs for Underground Railroad activity, and for our areas, which is going to be at Allen Chapel. What we discovered is there was a lot of Underground Railroad activity within Allen Chapel. And what you're going to discover with Pleasant Green is it becomes a place where those who were freedom seekers become members. And also you're going to discover is some of the original members were freedom seekers themselves. For example, one of the pastors of the church, Addison Haley, he escaped from freedom from Virginia. We just found it out, how long ago? Not too long ago, we found out he was a freedom seeker from Virginia.
About 3 months ago.
Yeah, 3 months ago, discovered that he was a freedom seeker from Virginia. Also, you're going to discover, and what it was interesting, even though you had these two different networks, they were working together. It wasn't like the AME network, the Baptist network, they were always working together to help those who were in the South escape to freedom. Next slide. Now we're gonna talk about the Black Methodist beginnings in Portsmouth. It becomes the Adventist Methodist Church, Allen Chapel, which was named after its founder, Richard Allen, organized in 1837. Next slide. What you have here is kind of sort of a map of Portsmouth. And what during this time, me and Dr. Fike talks about it. We talked about it, how the Ohio River was like knee level, and you actually could walk across it. What you're also going to discover is that you can walk across it, and I'm like, wow. Next slide. Here is one of the first places of worship for the AME Church. So you can see that's what it is. That's what it is. Next slide. Here's a map of the locations of what it becomes Allen Chapel. It starts over here in Market Street, then goes to 2nd Street, then goes to 3rd Street, and then goes over here where it is now, present day right now. And what you discover is this is the migration of the African American community. It started in this area, which was North End at that time, and it pushes northward and it becomes over here. This is where Allen Chapel is. This is where up a little bit up north of that comes Pleasant Green. And what you're going to discover with Pleasant Green is the same type of migration northward towards North End. Next slide. Here's another picture of the colored church. This is the AME Church on 5th Street, 1844. Next slide. Here is one of the prominent members of Allen Chapel. It's John J. Minor. He was a barber. And what you know about a barber, everybody goes to the barber shop. Everybody goes to the petition and get their hair done, and everybody goes to the barber shop and get their haircuts. And so it becomes an easy place where they can navigate information back and forth. They can slide information to or whatnot. And so John J. Minor becomes he becomes one of the major figures within Portsmouth that was helped with the Underground Railroad activity. He worked with Dan Lucas, Joseph Love, and that's what this right here said. John J. Minor, a member of Portsmouth AME Church, told Professor Siebert. Siebert comes down here. We know he's a historian that gets this study about the Underground Railroad in Ohio. And he said that he would first hide the freedom seekers at his residence. So he hid them in his house. He's free, but he's hiding those freedom seekers in his house. What you're going to discover also, what you're going to hear about Weaver would hide freedom seekers in his house. Planted them under their bed till nightfall. Then they took them up Chillicothe Pike, which is what we know as Highway 23, South Miles, and then turned them over to Dan Lucas and Joseph Love. They're connected to the AME Church. They took them up what is PP Creek, which is the area around Chillicothe. And counting a wagon, that's about 37, 38 miles from there, where they would turn them over to the muses and also color. So you have all these African Americans that were helping to navigate those freedom seekers, getting them to freedom. Next slide. One of the things we want to point out here is in red, that not only was it John J. Minor, his wife was a part of it. I promise you, there's nothing that John J. Minor was doing unless his wife knew about it. If you're married, you know what I'm talking about. Ain't no other word. He gonna do anything unless his wife knew about it. And so she was also a part of this network of getting freedom seekers from slavery to freedom. That's what this is talking about. Another time I took 3 others and they got them heck out of George Mitchell to go up the wedding at Piketon, 24 miles away from here, where we were overtaken by 4 horsemen at the toll gate. William Cook, which is connected to Shiloh Church. That shows you the interdenominational working. Colored, my wife was Martha Minor, and myself were in with the fugitives. So they got caught trying to help people to get the freedom. Freedom seekers get the freedom. Next slide. It's like I was telling you, he was a barber. And barbers, you can easily navigate. My brother was a barber, so I know about barbershops. They chop it up, talk about all kinds of stuff. And so ultimately, this is one of the places that they were navigating information at the barbershop. Next slide. This is a location of where John J. Miner's barbershop is. It's close to Patties and Pints. Next slide. There's another present day picture of it right here. This is where John J. Miner's barbershop, it was on 2nd Street. And what he was doing was he's talking to people like Ashley, because this is close to where Ashley's house is, and they're navigating and talking about information about how to get freedom seekers to freedom. Next slide. Like I said, it's close to Patties and Pints on East Corner, 2nd Corner Street. Next slide. The next person I wanted to talk about is John Q. Weaver. He was a station master on the Underground Railroad. He also, like I said, it's something about the barbershop. He also was a barber. He was an elder in the Allen Chapel, at Allen Chapel A&M. They call him, I don't know what they call him. I guess it's Professor Weaver.
Yeah.
I guess that's what they call Weaver. Professor Weaver. Next slide.
It's like a term of it here.
As I was talking about this navigation northward for the African American community. Go. Next slide. It ended up on 7th Street in the around 1870s. Next slide. Here is a conference, AME conference that happened at Allen Chapel on 7th Street. And what you're going to know is, go to the next slide, I'll show you. That's John Q. Weaver, 1893. Next slide. This is where Allen Chapel is present day. Founded in 1837. Next slide. The Black Baptist beginnings in Appalachian, Ohio. Next slide. That's on me. You can take you can go to the next slide. I don't want you to look too hard. Like I said, as it relates to this, there was also a network with the Baptist Church. You got Bastionio Baptist Church in Burlington, which is one of the first sites in Ohio that's on the network of freedom. They were integral part of getting freedom seekers to freedom. You had Black Fork in Pope Patch, Lawrence County, 1819. They were involved in the Underground Railroad. Yeah, First Baptist Chillicothe, they were involved in the Underground Railroad. You have Eden Baptist Church, PP Settlement. Remember that PP Settlement that I talked about earlier? That's where Eden Baptist was. You got Payne Creek, Gallup West. They also was part of Underground Railroad. And then you have Pleasant Green Baptist Church. And then what you have before you get to Pleasant Green is Shiloh. We know there was a Black Baptist church named Shiloh. We don't know what happened to it. And then like 5 years or 7 years later, Pleasant Green is organized. Yeah, go ahead, next slide. We have Bastionville Baptist Church in Burlington, Ohio, Lawrence County. We have here Jonathan Craddock. And he served on the Shiloh Anti-Slavery Missionary Baptist Church in Portsmouth. Okay. Next slide. He was also involved. Like I said earlier, you have Providence Anti-Baptist Association. They break away from the Tees Valley Baptist Association of Virginia over the issue of slavery. What you ultimately have is you have other Baptist associations that also break away from this same association. It becomes Union Baptist Association. It breaks up. It divides into Eastern Union and Western Union Missionary Baptist. Eastern and Western Union Anti-Slavery Missionary Baptist Association. Okay. Came to include congregation churches in Scioto, which is this county, Lawrence, Gallia, Meigs, Jackson, Pike, Ross, and Hampton counties. And what happens is this association became a hub to creating a Baptist network for freedom seekers. Those conductors, those hideaways, and all that. And Scioto County Congregation was located at Portsmouth, And the original congregation, original congregation was Shiloh. We know that Pleasant Green comes on the scene after Shiloh. Go ahead, next slide. Shiloh Anti-Missionary Baptist Association, organized 1852. Next slide. Color Baptist Church, Shiloh. This is newspaper article from 1862. Granted use of a street engine house for worship service, April 4th, 1862. This is just an article that shows that they met, Shiloh congregation met there. Like I said, 2 years later, Pleasant Green comes on the scene. We don't know what happened to Shiloh Church. All we know is this proceeding. And go to the next slide, I'll show you something. We know that they met because in 1857, it talks about Shiloh in this proceeding or whatever. So we know Shiloh comes on the scene. It disappears. We don't know what happened to it. 1864, Pleasant Green Baptist Church comes on the scene. Okay, next slide. This is where we go back to that same story of John J. Minor. That's where you get William Cook. That was on that list from the previous slide. Color and myself were in with the fugitives. Next slide. Pleasant Green Baptist Church, which I am the proud pastor of, organized in 1864. Next slide. This is the original building of Pleasant Green Baptist Church. One of our members that used to be a house there, but it's not there anymore. The house that was there is no longer there. But this is the original building of the Pleasant Green Baptist Church. Next slide. The founding pastor of Pleasant Green was Reverend Butler Harper. He was a freedom seeker himself. He was born into slavery in Virginia. He got in prison several times for talking about against slavery. He purchased his freedom in 1859. In 1862, he was ordained at Pleasant Green Baptist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. He leaves Kentucky and goes to Ohio by way of the city of Cincinnati. In 1864, he settles in Portsmouth and organizes Pleasant Green Baptist Church. We do not know. Do not know if the name came of Pleasant Green came from the church in Kentucky or not. We think, but we don't have. We can't 100% prove that's true or not. He served there for 17 years. When he moved to Kansas, he also organized a church in Athens, Ohio, as well. Next slide. Again, like I said, we have Shiloh here. We know Shiloh was there in 1862. We don't know what happened to Shiloh, but we know Pleasant Green comes on the scene in 1864. And then Pleasant Green's right here. Like I said, the migration of the Black community follows right along that line. Allen Chapel will be right along with that same little line. It followed the Black community. Next slide. Cornerstone, Pleasant Green. If you went outside, you'll see this cornerstone. It was organized in 1864. The first building was in 1865. And this was dedicated in 1922. Next slide. This is one of when it moved from its original location to this current location. I think this is one of the first pictures of the way it was originally, how the building was constructed originally in 1929. Next slide. This is the current location and what it looks like today. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, this is a caricature of Reverend Allison Haley. He was one of the members that was here when the church was organized. He was a freedom seeker from Virginia. And this is just a caricature of him or whatnot. And Emancipation Day meeting. Next slide. The next person, member is the Farleys, Jesse and George Farley. What we know is about the Farleys is there was a contest of what to name the community across the street from the church, and the person that wrote the essay won, and that's how it becomes Farley Square. And what we learned in that document that she wrote is that she talked about how Jesse and George were conductors on the Underground Railroad. What we learned about George Farley is he was also in the Civil War. He participated in the Civil War. He was the last surviving Union veteran of Portsmouth of the Civil War. His funeral, because it was probably so large, his funeral was at Allen Chapel, AME Church. Next slide. Next person is that we discovered was a member as well as Henry Seaton. This story talks about his escape and capture under the federal fugitive slave law of 1850, or whatnot. Next slide. And I'm gonna let Dr. Fight go from here.
All right, thanks. I'll just add a little bit about Henry Seaton. Henry Seaton's story is something that we discovered. It's never been written up. What we found was that he escaped from Greenup County on the 4th of July, which turns out to be not that unusual. A number of freedom seekers escapes were on the 4th of July, as well as Christmas. It's going to be holidays, assuming that maybe the master was occupied doing something else, partying or something, or what have you. But it seems that holidays were when they escaped. And he made it from basically, he crossed over, I think, to Ironton, and made it all the way to Cleveland. And it was when he was in Cleveland that he got captured. And the federal marshal took him by train that night, overnight, to Cincinnati. And they arrived in Cincinnati about 7 o'clock in the morning, went right to the federal court. And under the federal fugitive slave law, Henry Seaton had no legal representation. He was not allowed to have legal representation. But after a quick hearing, who was there? Well, Henry Seaton's enslaver was there. And another gentleman from Greenup, they identified Henry Seaton as the slave of Johnson. And so he was immediately sent back to Kentucky. But what we were able to do was we found him. Actually, we found his wife first, and she was one of the founding members of the church of Pleasant Green. We then found him in the census. He originally was living over in Greenup still. He was working as an iron worker for one of the furnaces. But then he moved to Portsmouth. We found him here living in Portsmouth, and then he married Fanny, and then joined the church. So Henry Seaton is buried up in Greenlawn Cemetery in an unmarked grave. All right. So let's talk about the First Presbyterian Church. You can see here that it was an integrated biracial congregation. I think that's really important to point out. So next slide. So this is First Presbyterian on the left. Everybody will probably recognize it. That's from Portsmouth. Really one of our iconic churches here in town. Built in 1851, I believe. But if you go in the front doors down here, the sanctuary is actually on the floor above. So when you enter here, there are stairs that go up on each side of the structure. And under those stairs on each side is a little door and a little, little hiding hole, for the term that often gets used. Little hiding hole. And it is there that freedom seekers, according to the oral tradition passed down within the church and church elders, that the church's ladies' sewing society, who were involved in helping freedom seekers, it was there that they would have been temporarily here. The next bill. So it was an integrated biracial church congregation. And we have found about 20 members, 20 African American members of the church, but we'd only have the names for like 3 or 4. But the 2 most famous, and those that are included in the oral history, the oral traditions of the church, involve Peter and Charlotte Weaver. And it turns out that their story is documented in Nelson Evans' history. We'll go to the next slide. But so Peter Weaver was a colored man born in 1748, an attaché of the courthouse. He was kind of like the janitor of the courthouse, and a well-known character of the town. He was the first bootblack in the town. He went to the taverns, shops, and stores on Saturday afternoons and black shoes and boots. He had customers by the month and by the quarter. He lived on the site of the National Hotel. Peter Weaver was a member of the First Presbyterian Church and prided himself on the fact the colored churches did not suit him. He always wore a silk hat, usually furnished secondhand from some friend in the church. In his latter days, Mr. Robert Bell, who owned the shoe factory in town, Mr. Robert Bell furnished him in silk hats. In the latter part of his life, Peter lives on the present side of the 6th Street Methodist Church. I think that is the Masonic on Chillicothe Street. His wife, Charlotte Weaver, was a character. She was a midwife and a factotum about the town. No child could be born, no woman buried, buried, and no social function
Without her assistance.
Yeah, without her assistance. She was born in 1778 on the South Branch of the Potomac River, a slave, and at 10 years was sold to a master named Walker, who took her to Kentucky. There she married Peter Weaver, who had had 2 wives before and was 3 years older than she. You might think, why did he have that many wives? Well, it doesn't tell us, but we know from the history of slavery that it probably was due to called family separation. He probably had his wife sold away from him.
Right.
So there she married Peter Weaver. Let's see, and Weaver works and bought his own freedom. Then he borrowed $1,000 and bought his wife's freedom, but was unable to buy that of his child by her. They came to Portsmouth before the town was located and built a cabin. They continued to live in Portsmouth until he died in 1805. It was 1865? 1805? Anyways. They both lived to be really quite old. That's what I'm wondering about that.
At the age of, he died at the age of 105. She had never been sick and was found dead in her bed.
Yeah. Okay. So within the oral tradition of the church, it is that Charlotte was active with the Ladies Sewing Society, and Peter, because of his work in town, he was all over town. He could bring freedom seekers into the church. He did notify Charlotte. Charlotte would notify the Ladies Sewing Society, and they would get into motion and provide food, clothing, also some instruction the oral sort of history that's been brought down to us is that one of the things that they would do is give them some instruction about how to walk, look like you were a free person, to hold your head up and look at people, not put your head down as you pass people. Okay, so what we're having to do with the sources for First Pres is use some oral history, right? And in some cases, that is all we have. Now, the Park Service, of course, wants as much documentation and verification as possible. And so ultimately, it's a combination of sources that we're using. And we're going to talk now about the associations of First Pres with Underground Railroad activity further. Next slide. Okay, so one of the other documented conductors inside the county who just recently been able to verify was Presbyterian was Orrin B. Gould in Lavinia School. And there is actually a new park here inside the county named after Orrin B. Gould. It should also be named for her, Lavinia, because she was as much of a conductor as Orrin was. But you can see this is from an interview with an African American woman from Morris County, and she identified Orrin Gould as a conductor. Orrin Gould lived at Wheelersburg, which is not actually that accurate. It was more like Franklin Furnace, because Orrin B. Gould owned Franklin Furnace. So, yeah, I guess the interviewee did not know that or didn't mention it, but anyway, she believed he was living in Wheelersburg, but it's pretty clear that their farm and house is located actually right by that church, right when you come across the Green Up Bridge, Jesse Stewart Bridge there. That is where Franklin Furnace was actually located. Okay, so the Goulds would hide freedom seekers in their barn, and they would use their horses, of course, to help transport them. Depending upon whether there were slave hunters out and about, you can take them two different ways. One, towards Portsmouth, or the other way was basically through Morris County. You might notice down there at the very bottom, she also mentions George Davis. George Davis was the only one I knew at Portsmouth. Davis was white. He had a big distillery at Portsmouth, and that's the original George Davis. I think we're now on George Davis V here inside the county. Okay, next slide. So probably the strongest piece of evidence that we have beyond the oral tradition involves Joseph Riggs and his wife Rebecca Baldridge Riggs. So we're lucky to have a photograph couple. But Rebecca Baldridge grew up in Adams County, a place called Cherry Fork, and her father was William Baldridge, who was a Presbyterian minister who was also an abolitionist and who was also an Underground Railroad conductor. So she grew up basically in an abolitionist family with a minister as her father who was involved in Underground Railroad. She ended up marrying Joseph Riggs. Riggs moved to Adams County when he was like 18 or late teens, and he ended up living in West Union. But he married Rebecca Baldridge Riggs, and for a number of years he went to her church, her father's church. Riggs ends up being probably today would be a multi-millionaire, but he ends up getting involved in the iron furnace industry. He'll move to Hayden Rock, Originally, he helped build some of the original furnaces in Lawrence County. He joins the American Anti-Slavery Society, which is William Lloyd Garrison's organization. He joins the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society. He is an agent for the Philanthropist newspaper, which is an abolitionist newspaper. So, like, if you live in Fort Smith, if you wanted a copy of the Philanthropist, right, you would get it from Riggs. So, we know from the records that are at First Presbyterian Church, we got access to their vault. And in their vault, they had the minutes of the Ladies Sewing Society. And there, I mean, it wasn't that big of a surprise, but it was pretty cool. We found that she was the president of the Sewing Society, and they regularly met in the Riggs' home. Okay. So you see there at the bottom, James Ashley would credit Joseph Riggs for helping fund his Underground Railroad work. So next slide. So who's this James Ashley guy? His name's come up here a little bit. I will say he's the most important and most famous of abolitionists to come from Fort Smith, Ohio, and ultimately also an Underground Railroad agent. He is the author of the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. It was James Ashley who introduced the legislation. It was Ashley who shepherded it through Congress. You see in the film Lincoln, it doesn't really do him justice because it really was Ashley more than anybody that got that through Congress. Now, Ashley in the 1890s was interviewed by Professor Wilbur Siebert from Ohio State that we talked about, and it's that interview that provides us with a really key verification. So next. Ashley, in his interview, gives some pretty detailed accounts of two different group escapes that he helped with. Now, we do know that he helped others, but these were kind of extraordinary escapes and so that's why he wrote them down. The first one involved Richard and Jane Bonser Goodrich, and their farm was located between Millersburg and the mouth of the Cider River. I actually really think their farm was where Cider River is. Now, this escape was not just James Ashley working with Richard and Jane Goodrich. What happened was that Ashley was over in Kentucky, he was over in Greenock, and some African Americans approached him asking for help with their escape. Ashley had gotten a reputation for being an abolitionist by that point, and we think he was about 17 or 18 years old, so he was actually pretty young at this time. So Ashley then went and found somebody that he hoped he could trust, and it was an African American man named Isaac, who was a slave in Greenock County. So what we have here is biracial cooperation, including cooperation with a slave in Kentucky that's helping other slaves escape. So what they did is Ashley and Isaac then went up the Ohio River to just above where they were over in Greenock, and they stole a boat, and then they ferried the group of freedom seekers, it was 5, almost directly across the river to the Goodrich farm at Ciderville. Now, Ashley doesn't know anything about what happens to them after that. Okay? What Isaac and he do is they go back to their boat and they get in their boat and they take it down the Ohio River past Portsmouth to the west side, and then they beach it there and they jump out of the boat and they run around, stamp the ground and make it look like there were a big group of people got out of that boat and just abandoned. And then he goes into Portsmouth and decides that he's going to kind of find out if slave hunters are about or if anybody's looking for the runaways. And he runs into Joseph Riggs. And he doesn't really know Riggs that well. I mean, he knows who he is, but he's not like buddies with him or anything. And Riggs like takes a gold coin out of his pocket and gives it to him and says, James, I think you'll need this. But like, he doesn't say that he winked, so ask yourself, how did Joseph Riggs know that James Ashley had helped those people escape the night before?
Those are good riches.
Because the Goodriches were part of that network that the Presbyterian Church was part of. We've not been able to verify that the Goodriches were Presbyterian, but we know that with Riggs knowing it, that it had to be within that Presbyterian network that Warren Gould was part of, that we just talked about. So that was one of his escapes. And so what we believe is that the freedom seekers were taken basically from Sciotoville to Portsmouth, and then from Portsmouth they were shipped up the main line, which is up Route 23. Okay, next slide. So the other group escape that actually documents involves the Beach family of Nile Township. And this is kind of like a good lesson for researchers. If you were reading through Siebert's interview with Ashley, Siebert spells beach completely different. And for like years, I couldn't find any beaches the way that Siebert was spelling it. And finally, for some reason, I guess I came across William Beach or something. And I was like, it kind of sounds like it's the same guy. So Siebert had misspelled his name, but it really was Beach, Beach, and there still are a lot of beaches living on the west side. So Ashley identified the Beach family in Nile Township of William, Charles, Wesley, and Sylvester as conductors on the west side and on the Underground Railroad. So Charles Wesley was the first medical doctor in Nile Township. His brother William was a longtime member of the Friendship Methodist Church. But his biography says that he actually was actually a candlelight at the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ today. But there was no congregation like that on the west side, so he felt most at home at the Friendship Methodist Church. Now, James Ashley's father was a preacher in the Candlelight Christian Church, but his father was pro-slavery. And that is actually why James Ashley ran away at age 14. His father wanted him to become a minister in the Christian church, and James did not subscribe to their pro-slavery faith and ran away. And he ran away to the west side, and he lived with a nurse family, which was a Quaker family, in Nile Township. So while he was living there in Nile Township, he befriended these other abolitionists, and that's how he made his connections with the Beaches. Now, William Beach would go on to be one of the founders of the Republican Party in Scioto County. He was elected county commissioner during the Civil War. So you can see that there were rather influential leaders in the community that secretly were breaking the law, that were carrying out this illegal activity. There's the Friendship Methodist Church. So if you ever get a chance and want to visit, the cemetery is off to the left, next to there you can find the Beach Monument. That's Dr. Beach's monument. And then next to it, next slide, is William Beach, buried right there in Friendship Cemetery. Next slide. And this is what I'm really excited about. What you're looking at on the right is the new historical marker that's going to be going down on 2nd Street at 2nd and Court. And the title of it is James and Ashley and Abolition of Slavery. This is actually a completely separate project. This was with the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation. They contacted me like out of the blue and said, look, we learned about James Ashley, and he people don't know about James Ashley, and they should. And we would like to pay for a historical marker if you'll help us with it. I was like, oh, wow, of course I'll help you with this. And so later this spring, once the city services department gets it installed, we'll be having a dedication ceremony. I'll invite everybody here to that. Next slide. So the markers are going to go in like right here. And then once our tour marker gets placed for our Appalachian Freedom Tour, it's going to be over on this side of the building. So you can look for that too. And all that's coming this year. So it's going to be a big year for Underground Railroad history, and not just Sauter County, but really the whole tri-state. So, is there anything else after that slide? Thank you. Yes, thank you. All right. Any last words, Reverend Hanlon? Questions?
I don't have a whole lot to say, but you can see, as you can see with, let me turn the light on. As you can see, the Underground Railroad had a lot of people involved in this process to help those who were enslaved to get freedom. It really is a testimony to the fact that how we can do something, we all work together. When do something that was evil, that we don't like talking about at times, but we're thankful for all those that work hard to navigate that, to help others get the freedom. And we've learned that freedom is so precious to each one of us. And I'm just so delighted to be about this process. I didn't know about all this stuff. I'm going to tell y'all is I love history. I had no idea. One thing that I didn't mention that I think we alluded to it, but we didn't directly mention it. And I remind people all the time about this, and that is what the Ohio River was considered. If you know Bible about the River Jordan, is that you know how the Israelites moved from Egypt to freedom? That the Ohio River for the slave was that route to freedom. Once they crossed the Ohio River, they're escaping to freedom. And so that's when you hear those Negro spirituals talking about the River Jordan, and what they're talking about is the Ohio River. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about crossing, telling people to go certain places to cross the Ohio River. And so I'm just thankful. I think it's a blessing to be in Ohio and have all this rich history. And now we're uncovering all these different things. Because I didn't know about Addison Haley. He was a freedom seeker from Virginia. And I'm sure there's probably others that were members here that were freedom seekers that we haven't even discovered. And so all that being said, do y'all have any questions? Okay.
Would you say, would you say something more about this migration of the African American community that was going on at the time period that I can imagine why?
You want to start this?
Are you talking about in the city, like how?
Mhm.
So part, you know,
I'm going to answer part of it too, but I was going to let you answer
you can
first.
see with both the maps for Allen Chapel and for Pleasant Green that the Black Baptist Church and the Black Methodist Church were always kind of close together, but that they kind of moved in a northeasterly direction. It's first thing is that the Black community was always living on the backside of Portsmouth, right? So like the oldest part of Portsmouth, the Bony Fiddle part, right? So the backside of that would be, you know, 4th Street and kind of above, down the Bony Fiddle. But as Portsmouth grew, you know, it kind of grew in that northeasterly direction. And as the railroad came in, it came down 10th Street, all the way down 10th Street. Now, today it doesn't go all the way down 10th Street, right? It's not like it used to be. But you always hear on the other side of the tracks, right? You know, like it's a common American thing in American cities for segregation,
Right.
With the railroad tracks being the dividing line. So you see that here in Portsmouth, and it's very American. I mean, like you find this like in city after city. Okay, but as the city grew, the the north end kind of moved with it as it grew.
Okay, another part of it, Drew had mentioned, you talked about Houston Hollow and the fact that some of us Black people were pushed out, and also those who migrated becomes what becomes this area of North End as well. You didn't mention that part.
I didn't. Yeah, there was some migration back to Portsmouth. So 1831,
Right.
You have what was called the Black Friday. It's known as Black Friday. When the Black laws of Ohio, which required African American immigrants into Ohio, they were supposed to register with the county clerk and show them their free papers, but they also had to put up a $500 surety bond, and that $500 surety bond had to be signed by 2 white Ohio residents.
And think about how you're gonna get 2 white citizens to sign off on that.
So the law was not there was not a lot of compliance with this, right? So you had a lot of basically undocumented immigrants into Ohio, right? And the law was that they were supposed to register with the county clerk, but there was not a lot of registration. So like today, if you go looking for these records, you're not going to find a bunch of records of people having been recorded as free. Okay? So what happens is that as Portsmouth develops, the canal comes in by 1832, but they're building the canal in the early 1830s. Okay, that's when there was this sort of influx of the Black population really started to grow with the rest of the city. It's like as Portsmouth grew, the Black population. But by 1830, there may be, we don't have a good census count for sure, but Nelson Evans says that 80 African Americans were expelled from the city on Black Friday. 80.
I think that's kind of when we think about it, it's probably that's a low.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say really for sure, but we do know that like the oral tradition is that some of those people that were expelled settled in what's called Houston Hollow today. Okay. And there may have already been African Americans living there because the Lucases that settled this area they moved to Ohio and brought their slaveholdings with them and freed them. And so some of them would have been living in the Lucasville area. Okay. But that's where this community develops in what's now Houston Hollow. And one of the things we found we didn't know anything about, there actually after the war there was a church up in there that was connected to First Group.
And some of the members, some of the members that's where they live.
Right. And for a long time, but you go up there now, there's no African Americans living up in Houston Hollow. So probably the end of segregation, the modern civil rights movement and all that helps explain why there's no Houston Hollow, right? Because people move back to the city. Happy to answer any other questions.
Any other questions anybody else have? Go ahead.
Mine is, we don't have anything about like the Quaker involvement at all.
Interesting. Yeah, the Quakers, generally were very involved in the Underground Railroad. It's just that Portsmouth and Cider County did not have a large Quaker population. But I will say this about James Ashley. I only told you part of the story because he said Riggs gave him a gold coin and an old Quaker gave him $100 bill. Now, you might be saying, well, who's this Quaker? Well, we've got our theories about who the Quaker might be. But one of them is that Ashley lived in the Houston residence. You remember the Houston corner? Well, Samuel J. Houston, that's his mansion, his house, his wife, and right now I'm forgetting her name, but Her mother was a Quaker. She lived in the Houston home. And she probably went to First Pres because there were a number of Quakers. There were a handful of Quakers in Portsmouth. And the Robinson family was another that had Quaker roots. And they were members of First Pres too. So there were these people that were raised Quakers in Portsmouth, but they appear to have belonged to First Pres.
So there was never a Quaker meeting.
Not that I've been able to find or haven't come across a Quaker meeting in Portsmouth. Yeah. So the Quakers appear to have had affinity with First Pres.
I mean, theologically speaking, they're not completely the same, but they're close. Theologically speaking, a lot of different things.
Yeah, I mean, there's particularly the Presbyterians here were part of a really radical Presbytery, the Chillicothe Presbytery. They were the most radical Presbytery in all of the United States. They were the ones that were pushing the rest of the Presbyterian Church to expel slaveholders from community.
And ultimately, I think I talked about by email yesterday, yesterday or the day before that. Ultimately, the same thing that happens with the Baptist church and they splitting over the issue of slavery. The same thing happens with the Presbyterian church where they split over slavery. Mm-hmm. The same issue that Richard Allen had, and reason why it becomes an African Methodist Episcopal, because he splits away from the Methodist Episcopal church over the same issue of slavery. Yeah. So it was a galvanizing type of issue for a lot of people.
And I'll just add to that African American leadership, and pushing for abolition was really.
I mean, every time they have a meeting, every time they at Tees Valley, they have a meeting, come together, and they'll raise the issue of slavery. And ultimately, they just breaks away from the association, form their own association. The first a Baptist association in America was started here.
That's right. The Providence Anti-Slavery Baptist Association was the first Black Baptist Church Association in all the United States. It was right here. And the Shiloh congregation was a member.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Try to find out what happened to Shiloh.
I don't. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
All we know is we have Shiloh, and then what's interesting about Pleasant Green is the members of the original members from Pleasant Green comes out of Allen Chapel.
Okay, right. Yeah.
But and so you have Shiloh Baptist congregation. Don't know what happens to it. You have this group of those who come out of Allen Chapel. They hook up with Butler Harbor to organize Pleasant Green Baptist Church. Yeah. Nobody knows what happened in Shiloh. All we know is it was here and then it was gone.
Yeah, and unfortunately with the floods and all that, a lot of the church records that we would hope to be able to access, we just don't exist.
Yeah,
I will say that Union Baptist Church, the one up in Hood Patch or was that Black Fork, we were up there maybe a month or so ago, and the elders said, well, we might have some books in the back. Might want to take a look at. And I was like, oh, books? What are you talking about? Books in the back? And he's like, well, we got a vault back. We got a safe. And so he went in. He pulls out this book out of the safe, and the other ladies are like, oh, I've never seen that. Like it just never gets brought out. Yeah. But it was the minutes of the congregation going back to like the 1820s.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Like, it's not before. I'm thinking maybe actually to 1819. But anyway, it's like just incredible, records that nobody's really looked at before. So we're going to be able to like really tell the story of those members of that church, because we've already identified like the pastors. They're already documented as underground railroad.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get all of that. We're just trying to regain all the history that and just acknowledge and identify all these different places that are instrumental being a part of the Underground Railroad. I'm just so humbled to be the pastor of Pleasant Green, and you have this rich history, and we're just finding more stuff about. And I'm confident, Dr. Fight, that we'll find some more stuff as relates to those original members and some stuff that's connected to Underground Railroad. I'm just confident in that.
And I'll also say this about Pleasant Green is that if you track Pleasant Green's history past the Underground Railroad, Pleasant Green was the center of the civil rights movement. Here in Portsmouth, really, leading the way along with Allen Chapel.
I mean, they had Emancipation Day. They had all those different things. They've been instrumental of the freedom voyage from slavery to Jim Crow to the civil rights movement of the 60s, all the way through up to today.
There were members of this church that parents sued Portsmouth City Schools and forced the integration of the high school back in 1885 or something like that. So, rich history of resistance to segregation, long before the 1950s. We're talking about, the 1880s, but there's always been resistance to that. Well, any other questions?
Any other questions? We want to answer any questions you have. We're still learning. One of the things I want to just point out, we have back there with Brother Brady. His mom was one of the original historians of the church, and so anything we know about even who those members were, it was because of her.
Right.
So we have a list of members, so we can go back and do the genealogy research. You can go back, locate the name and historical documents. If it wasn't for what she did and keeping those records of all these names, we couldn't find out about Addison Haley and all these different pastors and all the different things that we learned about the church. So I'm thankful for what she did.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm thankful for other people in the community that have saved things, and like the photograph that we have of Professor Weaver.
Oh man, yeah.
Right. The big group photo, that was something
that was just recently too.
Yeah. Had to.
Have there been attempts to get the National Geographic group to correct that map?
That's a good question. Not yet. I think once we get stuff listed, we're going to try to work with the Park Service because they use a very similar map.
And it's completely wrong.
So if we can get the Park Service to correct their map, then maybe
it is spread and spread.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I want to first of all say thank you on behalf of Pleasant Green Baptist Church. We had some of our other members were able to come in, and I'm excited. We got Sister Carla. Everybody knows Sister Carla back there. We have Brother Brady that's back to this. His mom was a historian, Brother Bob. My wife is over here, the best looking person in the house. And Brother Pooh was here. I think he had to leave. So, but on behalf of Pleasant Green Baptist Church, we want to say the grandbabies back there. Now, I don't want to forget them. The apple of Nana's eye is back there. And so I want to say thank you on behalf of Pleasant Green Baptist Church.
we want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for allowing us to talk about our history. I'm sure we're going to find more. And when we find more, you're welcome to come back and we'll talk about what the other stuff we're learning about our church and how we have made a contribution to history. Because what we're trying to get people, convince people is Black history is American history. I know it sounds like they don't, but Black history, we're in Black History Month this month. So Black history is American history. I bet you didn't know some of the stuff that you learned up here, didn't you? Some of the stuff is brand new. I promise you, brand new. You didn't know about John J. Minor and all these different people. I promise you didn't, because I did. And I'm in 3 months, I'm getting my doctoral degree. I did do something. And so, but thank you for coming. And anytime the doors are open, you're welcome to come worship with us, whatever activity we got going on. We're going to have a praise fest on Sunday, Sunday at 4. So you're welcome to come back and be with us on Sunday as well. So thank you so much for coming. And give our hands up praise. I'm now Deacon Ray to close us out in a word of prayer. And then we're done. Can you do some words of prayer, Deacon?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come again, thank you for allowing us to be PGBC. Thanking you for allowing us to go through the history of the fight and as for Lily has done research. Lord, we just thank you for all that you've done. As we go into our separate places, let us go over the mind stay on you. Talk to us as we go. In your name we pray.
Amen.